Boldwood presents Christmas at Carly's Cupcakes. Written by Jessica Redland and read by Emma Swan. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. 4 weeks until Christmas. Ah! Carly, help! Heart racing at the anguished cry, I dropped my bookings diary on the counter and dashed into the workshop at the back of my shop. What's wrong? My younger sister looked up from the table. It's awful. I've killed Santa. I looked into her mournful blue eyes and couldn't help laughing. It's not funny, Bethany protested. I've killed a snowman and a reindeer too. She folded her arms and pouted like a petulant child. She looked and sounded more like she was 10 than 23. I'm so rubbish at this. I'm rubbish at everything I do. I moved round to survey her handiwork. Oh, I said, unable to keep the disappointment out of my voice. I did warn you, she said defensively. Well, as I always say, it takes patience and practice. I could hear the lack of conviction in my words. Bethany shook her head, picked up the Santa cupcake, peeled off the messy wrapper and took a large bite. I don't have any practice, as well you know, she mumbled through a mouthful of sponge. And I've been practising for months now. I'm getting worse instead of better, aren't I? I'd have loved to give her some reassurance, but she was right. After 4 months of working in my shop, Carly's Cupcakes in the North Yorkshire seaside town of Whitsborough Bay, Bethany had perfected the ability to bake beautiful light sponge cakes, but she had zero talent when it came to decorating them. She hadn't even mastered a basic buttercream swirl, and her iced figures were unidentifiable. If her task was simply to attach one of my figures to a cake I'd prepared, she somehow managed to squash the figure, flatten the swirl and smear buttercream all over the wrapper and the table. Today's attempts were so squashed and out of shape that they resembled roadkill. Not exactly the jolly festive vibe I was aiming for. I'm a liability, Bethany wailed, wiping buttercream off her chin. She released her long blonde highlighted hair from its ponytail and shook it out as she stepped away from the table. I told you that you shouldn't employ me. You are not a liability. I handed Bethany a damp cloth so she could wipe her sticky fingers. It's just going to take more patience and practice than we might have hoped. There you go again, patience and practice. How long does it take? She narrowed her eyes at me. I bet you could do everything perfectly on your first attempt, couldn't you? I grimaced. Maybe not first attempt, but I'd never found any of the cake decorating techniques a challenge. From the moment I picked up a piping bag and created my first swirl, I knew I'd found my talent. I knew it! Bethany cried. You're a success at whatever you do, whereas I fail at everything. I raised my eyebrows at her. Oh, I think someone's being a little overly dramatic, aren't they? Taking the cloth from her, I wiped the table. She folded her arms across her chest. Name one thing I've done better than you, she challenged. Easy. What are you doing on the 22nd of December? She shrugged. Getting married? Exactly. I stepped into the small kitchen next to the workshop and rinsed the cloth. I might be sorted with my career, but my love life's a disaster, I called to her. You'll find a job that suits you eventually, but you know there's a role here for as long as you want it. I wiped my hands and stepped back into the workshop. You're brilliant with customers, and you can't deny that. And you know I love you being here. It's my fault for putting too much pressure on you. Maybe you should stick to baking cakes and serving in the shop for now. Bethany picked up another destroyed cupcake, unwrapped it and took a bite. I raised my eyebrows at her. What? It's not like you'd have been able to sell them. They're beyond saving. She scrunched up the wrapper and tossed it towards the bin, but it bounced off the side and landed in the middle of the floor. Are you going to leave that there? I asked, keeping my tone light, even though leaving a mess like that was a pet peeve of mine and Bethany knew it. She often accused me of being too health and safety conscious, but that was because she was new to catering and simply couldn't see the risks. I let my sister get away with a lot, but I drew the line at a messy workplace. With an exaggerated sigh, Bethany picked up the wrapper, placed it deliberately in the bin, and sat down at the table. When you said you needed someone to help in the shop, you were after someone you could train to take the pressure off you, not someone who would create you twice as much work. It's not that bad. It is. My decorating skills are worse than a toddler's, and I make more of a mess than they would. She swept her arm across the table. I didn't mean to do it, but my eyes automatically flicked towards the wall where I'd already spotted several splats of red and green buttercream as well as some icing trails. Bethany must have followed my eyeline. No! How have I managed to decorate the wall too? I moved towards the wall, but she grabbed the cloth from my hand. It's my mess, she muttered. I'll sort it out. The doorbell tinkled, indicating the arrival of a customer. Trying not to cringe as Bethany managed to smear the red buttercream across my pristine white paintwork instead of wiping it off, I headed through the archway into the shop. Sorry to have kept you, I said to the customer. How can I help? She smiled. My name's Jen Alderson. I got a text to say the birthday cake I'd ordered was ready. Ah, yes, it's all done. I turned and carefully lifted the sturdy cake box off a shelving unit behind me. Placing it on the counter, I lifted the lid and deftly unhooked the side flaps, revealing a woodland-themed birthday cake. A large round tree stump with a fox on top of it was surrounded by cupcakes decorated like toadstools on which a rabbit, owl, badger and squirrel were seated. A number 4 sign hung on the front of the tree stump, and letters stating Happy 4th Birthday Freddie were secured to the green icing base. I'd had such fun creating it, but, as always, experienced a brief moment of nervous tension that it wouldn't meet the customer's expectations. She'd been quite vague about what she wanted, and I feared that one day a customer's vision and my interpretation of it would be a disastrous mismatch. Jen gasped. Oh my goodness! Freddie's going to love it! Thank you so much! It's even better than I imagined. So much detail! I smiled, the tension leaving my shoulders. Nailed it. Thank you, I'm glad you like it. I love it. Am I too late to order a Christmas cake? I'm fully booked for anything complex, but I'm still taking orders for simpler designs. Do you know what you'd like? She chattered through some ideas and showed me some designs she'd saved to her phone, but it was hard to concentrate with Bethany clattering about in the workshop. What on earth was she doing? I hoped she wasn't rearranging the kitchen again. Last time she'd decided to be helpful like that, I hadn't been able to find anything. Jen placed an order for a chocolate cake shaped like a reindeer's head with chocolate antlers, then thanked me again and left with the woodland birthday cake. There was a squeal and another clatter from the workshop. I took a deep breath before going to investigate. As soon as I stepped through the archway, I felt my body deflate as I took in the carnage. Oh my goodness! Bethany! I couldn't keep the despair out of my voice. It wasn't my fault. Her shoulders sank. Actually, it was. I thought I'd try again and do what you said, patience and practice, but the piping bag exploded. I'm sorry, Carly. I tried to clear it up, but I think I made it worse. I closed my eyes for a moment in the desperate hope that when I opened them, I'd discover I'd been hallucinating and Bethany hadn't really managed to cover the tables, walls and floor in globs of red butter icing. Or, far worse, the 60 cupcakes I'd already decorated for tomorrow night's Christmas lights switch on. "You're mad at me, aren't you?" Bethany whined. I opened my eyes. Damn, no hallucination. The thought of all the rework needed filled me with panic, and I blinked back tears. I fought to keep my voice light and steady, anxious that Bethany wouldn't see how bad this was. "I'm not mad." "Yes, you are." Her voice wobbled. "Okay, I am a bit, but these things happen. It's not the end of the world." Although it felt pretty close at that moment, knowing how much other work I had to do. The cupcakes could potentially have been salvageable, but it looked like she'd already attempted that, and they now resembled the roadkill calamities she'd created herself. "Why are some of them on the floor?" She cringed as she glanced down at the dozen or so cakes splattered near her feet, all buttercream side down. "I knocked a tray over when I was trying to clean the wall. I'm so sorry. Should I start baking some new ones?" What I really wanted was for Bethany to leave the premises so I could start over in safety. "Hopefully Joshua's parents will understand if I'm late again," she added, distinct uncertainty in her voice. She was having dinner with Margaret and Damien, her future in-laws, with whom she had a somewhat shaky relationship. They'd made it clear that they thought Joshua and Bethany were too young to get married, and had often passed comment on Bethany's seeming inability to hold down a steady job. I knew they made her nervous, and that it broke her heart that they hadn't welcomed her into their family with the same love and enthusiasm our parents had shown towards Joshua. I didn't want to add any fuel to the fire by making her late, and it was the perfect excuse for me to start over on the cakes without her. I gave her a reassuring smile. "Tell you what, as it's nearly closing time, why don't you head off and get yourself ready, and I'll finish off here." "But the mess." "I'll sort it. See you tomorrow." "If you're sure it's okay to go?" I couldn't be surer. "Definitely. Off you go and get that seating plan sorted. Sit me next to someone nice." Bethany removed her apron and flashed me a grateful smile. "Thank you. You're a saint." "I know," I muttered under my breath as she grabbed her bag and coat from the hooks on the wall. "Only a saint would give you this many chances." Chapter 2. As soon as the door closed, I released a sigh of relief. Peace and quiet was restored. I shook my head at the carnage once more, then grabbed the bin and swept the cupcakes into it, cringing at the waste. I filled a bowl with hot, soapy water and started scrubbing. Although I'd never admit it to her, Bethany was right about being a liability. But what could I do? I couldn't sack my own sister, especially not after the incident in her previous job. She'd been so excited when she started the role at Sandy Shaw's nursery last year. The first 9 months went brilliantly, and she radiated with happiness. Mum, Dad and I were convinced she'd finally found her vocation in life, after a few false starts in hairdressing, dog grooming and lifeguarding. The children loved her, she got on well with the other staff, she sped through her first qualification with ease, and her manager was considering fast-tracking her to the next level. Then it happened. An estranged father with a grudge, a drugs problem and a knife turned up at home time and tried to grab his 3-year-old son. When Mum phoned me in tears to say they were on their way to Whitsborough Bay General Hospital because Bethany had been stabbed, I feared the worst. By the time I arrived at the hospital, I'd been bordering on hysteria. I found Joshua and my parents in the waiting room, pacing up and down, anxious for the verdict. Thankfully, it was a positive one. The knife had missed any vital organs and arteries, and despite losing a lot of blood, medical staff assured us there was no reason Bethany wouldn't make a full recovery. I'd always felt fiercely protective towards my younger sister. At 8 years her senior, it had been an instinctive older sibling thing, but she was one of those accident-prone kids, so I worried about her constantly, and our parents were exactly the same. We never made a fuss when Bethany announced each new career choice, reassuring her it was more important to be happy, and even encouraging her to leave if she wasn't feeling satisfied. Too late, we collectively realised we should have challenged her more. We should have explained that most jobs included undesirable tasks and bad days. We should have given her coping mechanisms so she could build up her resilience. Hindsight was a great thing. After the stabbing, the desire to protect her was stronger than ever. I was certain that if my parents could have put her in a bubble and moved her back home, they would have. I certainly wanted to. She was in good hands with Joshua, though. He couldn't have been more perfect for Bethany. Even though they were the same age, he was thoughtful and mature beyond his years, which provided the perfect balance and grounded my sister. They'd met 2 years ago when she was a lifeguard. A young boy badly misjudged a dive into the pool and landed on top of Joshua, knocking him unconscious. Bethany had pulled Joshua from the water and resuscitated him. He'd waited for her after work a few days later with a bouquet of flowers and a dinner invitation. They'd moved in together after only 6 months, but it didn't feel hasty. Anyone seeing them together could see how deeply they loved each other. Physically, Bethany did heal, but the emotional scars ran deeper. Mum, Dad, Joshua and I were all convinced it was too early, but Bethany insisted she was ready to return to the nursery as soon as she was signed off as fit for work. It was the first time she'd shown so much passion for a job, and the first time she'd shown such determination, so we had no choice but to stand back and hope she was as ready as she claimed. She returned to work with a smile on her face, laughing at how worried we all were, full of reassurances that she'd be fine. By late morning, her manager found her curled up in a ball on the floor of the staff toilets, sobbing uncontrollably. Joshua took more leave from work while Bethany further convalesced, but when he couldn't take any more time off, he expressed concern about leaving her alone. She claimed she didn't need a babysitter, but she wasn't fooling any of us. Her sparkle was gone. Her zest for life had gone. Pale-faced and jumpy, my fun-loving sister had gone. I suggested she keep me company at the shop, and was both surprised and relieved when she agreed, although she spent the first fortnight in my flat above the shop rather than with me. She napped, watched TV, or flicked through magazines, only wandering down the internal stairs occasionally to say hello and make me a drink. The haunted expression on her face, hollow cheeks, wide eyes, filled me with dread, and I worried we'd lost her. I suggested she go back to her doctor, but she was adamant that all she needed was time. I didn't push further in case my nagging stopped her coming to the shop each day. Mum, Dad and Joshua all mooted the idea of professional help, but the suggestion made her angry or tearful, so they backed down too. We all hoped she was right about just needing time. During the 3rd week at mine, she stayed downstairs with me for a little longer each day. By the 4th week, she spent some full days with me, and the change in her during that fortnight filled me with hope. She chatted, made jokes and even served a few customers when I was in the middle of trickier tasks. By week 5, Bethany was downstairs with me full time every day, and her fun, bubbly personality seemed to be back. She always had a gift for accents and had me in stitches as she impersonated some of the demanding or quirky customers she'd encountered in her various jobs. She told amusing stories of naughty dogs and their look-alike customers from her grooming days, and tales of calling time on amorous couples in the pool when she was a lifeguard. During quiet moments, we'd stand by the shop windows looking out over Castle Street, and she'd make up stories about the people passing, enacting hilarious conversations she imagined them having, until tears ran down my cheeks and I had a stitch from laughing so much. After 6 weeks, she announced that she was ready to return to her role at Sandy Shaw's nursery. She looked ready. She acted ready. She didn't make it past the gates. She sat beside me in the workshop later that day, her pale face streaked with tears. "What will I do now?" she asked me. "I loved that job, but it's obvious I'm never going to be able to go back." My need to keep her safe and protected kicked in. "Why don't you work for me?" Her eyes lit up for a moment, then quickly clouded. "Doing what? It's not busy enough to have someone in the shop full time, and I've already proved useless when it comes to icing cakes." She'd made a few attempts at icing over the past fortnight, and they hadn't gone well. "Yes, but that's because I haven't trained you properly. You were just playing. With a bit of practice and patience, I could get you up to speed. And you know I was thinking about taking someone on." She pondered for a moment. "I need to talk to Joshua. Can I let you know tomorrow?" "Of course. And if you do accept the job but you don't like it, you feel ready to apply for a job at another nursery, or you want to try out a new career, then you just need to say, 'I'm not going to trap you here forever.'" She gave me a weak smile. "It has to work both ways. If you think I'm rubbish, you have to sack me." "You won't be rubbish. Carly!" "Okay. I promise to dismiss you if you're rubbish, but you won't be, and it'll be fun." I gave her a big smile. "Talk it over with Joshua. I won't be offended if you say no, but I'd love it if you say yes. It's been a quiet 4 years working on my own, and it's been lovely having company again." And it really had been. I'd studied catering at college and had secured a full-time apprenticeship afterwards with Mrs. Armstrong, the owner of the imaginatively named The Cake Shop on the skirts of Whitsborough Bay's town centre, so I'd spent the first 9 years of my working life with constant company. Then Mrs. Armstrong dropped the bombshell that the estate agent next door wanted to expand into our premises and had made her an offer too good to refuse. It wasn't long after I'd opened Carly's Cupcakes that I started craving company. I loved the interaction with customers, but it was intermittent, and I really missed having colleagues to chat to or run ideas by. With the business in its infancy, I couldn't risk employing anyone until I was certain I could earn enough to sustain another salary. At the start of this year, after good year-on-year growth, I'd made the decision to recruit in the summer, so I genuinely did have a vacancy for Bethany. To my delight and relief, she accepted the job. Our parents and Joshua all thought it was a brilliant idea, separately admitting to me that they were grateful I'd be able to keep an eye on her. It really had been great at first. We chatted and sang our way through each day, and we'd laughed at her many disasters. But now, looking at the carnage in the workshop, it wasn't funny anymore. December was my busiest time of the year, and my sister was costing me time and money. Despite my promise to dismiss her if she was rubbish, I couldn't let her go. But there was no way we could continue like this. I was going to need to rethink her role. So much for the little fantasy I'd had about her being my apprentice and us working side by side to create beautiful cakes. My phone rang, making me jump. Bethany. "What did you forget?" I asked. "Nothing. I just wanted to ask you something about the seating plan. A few of Joshua's school friends are still single, so I wondered if—" "Don't you dare. They'll all be 8 years younger than me." "So?" I shuddered. "It's icky." "How's it icky?" "When I had my first proper relationship," I massively emphasised the word to make sure my meaning was clear, You, Joshua, and his friends were in your final year of primary school. Need I say more? Ooh, that is icky. Exactly, so don't even think about setting me up. OK, I promise. You've made your point disgustingly and effectively. See you tomorrow. Will do. Bye. I hung up, shuddering again. The ickiness wasn't the only reason for me avoiding a set-up. The main reason was that I didn't want to meet someone. The deed was already done. I was already truly, madly, deeply in love. And unfortunately, he didn't feel the same way. Chapter 3. Did you get the seating plan finalised? I called from the workshop when Bethany arrived at the shop shortly before 10 the following morning. Yes, but it took ages, she called back. I knew Joshua had a big family, but I had no idea it was so complicated. We've got aunties not speaking to uncles, a homophobic grandma and a gay grandson, cousins at war, and goodness knows what else. When Margaret suggested we might need some assistance, I thought she was interfering as usual, but we seriously needed help. I think we finally got a version that will avoid the outbreak of World War III. Family politics, eh? Sounds fun. And I'm sat next to... She headed through to the workshop, unwinding her scarf. I can't remember. Sorry. I think I might have put you next to Paige. My stomach sank, and I tried to keep the edge from my tone. Your bridesmaid, Paige? I was one of 7 bridesmaids, alongside Bethany's 4 best friends and a couple of Joshua's young nieces. I'd never warmed to Paige. She'd been friends with Bethany since primary school, so she'd spent loads of time at our house when Bethany was growing up. I'd found her to be loud and bossy, and from what I'd seen recently, those qualities hadn't diminished in adulthood. I'd never breathed a word to Bethany, though, so I'd just have to hope that the person sat on the other side of me at the wedding was more my cup of tea. Bethany shrugged off her coat and hung it up. I think so. Or is she on the friends table? I honestly can't remember. There were so many versions. I promise it's not one of Joshua's single friends, though. And it's not the auntie with the flatulence problem. I'm pleased to hear it. The other adult bridesmaids, Amanda, Robin and Layla, were friends of Bethany's from senior school. I'd met them on a few occasions when I'd still been living at home, but had never exchanged more conversation than a passing hello. The day we chose the bridesmaid dresses and then the hen-do in November had been the first real opportunities to get to know them. Although they were very giggly and a bit immature, I'd found them to be very friendly and welcoming. By contrast, despite having known her for years, I'd found Paige to be quite cold, almost hostile. I'd wondered whether she resented me being chief bridesmaid after she'd repeatedly pointed out that she'd known Bethany the longest. I hadn't been petty enough to point out that I actually held that accolade. When we were looking at bridesmaid dresses, Paige had been an absolute pain. A voluptuous size 16, she was critical of every style suggested, putting herself down for being larger than the others. They rallied round her, assuring her she was beautiful with an amazing figure, which I had to agree with. With dimples, an English rose perfect complexion and black glossy curls, Paige was striking. But I was certain that she knew it too. Her self-deprecating approach came across to me as pure attention-seeking. Joshua's family was Scottish, and Bethany had chosen a bluey-grey colour to match their family kilt. But, with sizes ranging from 8 to 16, finding a style to suit everyone presented a challenge. Mum suggested we all have the same full-length tulle-covered skirt, but with a different bodice to suit each bridesmaid's body shape. Even Paige couldn't disagree with that. I started to notice that Paige didn't just direct jibes at herself. She made constant little digs at the others. They were subtle, but they were definitely there. Whether it was about Layla's petite size 8 frame, the gap between Amanda's front teeth, Robin's auburn hair, or Bethany being a princess. Mum clearly noticed it too, and we exchanged looks several times, but neither of us voiced our concerns because none of the others seemed fazed by Paige's comments. We were probably being overly protective as usual. I was determined to give Paige the benefit of the doubt and try to enjoy her company at Bethany's hen do, but by the time we'd finished our meal, I'd taken a strong dislike to her. Loud and leery with a few drinks inside her, the subtle put-downs became less subtle and more abusive. I lost count of the amount of times she called Bethany ditzy, clumsy or forgetful. The strange thing was, my sister and her other friends genuinely didn't seem to notice, so I had to conclude that it was my issue, not Paige's. "Cuppa?" Bethany asked, bringing my focus back to the present. "Yes, please." She made her way into the kitchen. "Oh my God, you finished them!" I turned to face her. "I baked fresh ones last night, then came down early this morning to decorate them." "How early?" "About 5 o'clock. 5? Bethany leaned against the kitchen doorway, eyes wide. "I'm so sorry." "It's done. Forget about it," I said gently. Then I smiled and adopted a begging tone. "Just please promise me you won't go anywhere near the new batch, especially not with a loaded piping bag." She nodded solemnly. "I won't. I promise to stay on the shop side all day." Sighing, Bethany backed into the kitchen and filled the kettle. She couldn't ice cakes, but she did have her uses. My sister could make the perfect cup of tea. "So what happens at this Christmas light switch-on thingy?" Bethany asked, handing me a mug of tea 5 minutes later. "Does everyone bring food?" I shook my head. "No, just me, and Tara provides hot drinks for everyone." My friend Tara owned the Chocolate Pot, the cafe next door to us. She'd opened up roughly a decade before me and had been really generous with her advice and help over the years. "And they don't pay for it?" Bethany asked. "No." She frowned. "Then why is it down to you two? It must cost you both a fortune." I shook my head. "I only make basic cupcakes, so the cost isn't huge. It usually leads to them buying a batch of cupcakes at some point before Christmas and reminds them to use me for the next occasion cake, so it's win-win all round." "That's okay then." She patted my arm. "Wouldn't like to think anyone was taking advantage of my sister's kindness." I had to cover my mouth with my mug so she couldn't see me smiling at the irony of her comment. Tara had repeatedly suggested that Bethany was taking advantage of my kindness and had definitely outstayed her welcome, reminding me of Bethany's open invitation to dismiss her if she was rubbish. I'd certainly been tempted after yesterday's fiasco, but a late night and an early morning had put me back on track, and it didn't seem such a crisis anymore. It wasn't the first time, and certainly wouldn't be the last time I'd put hours in like that. I'd pulled a few all-nighters over the years to keep on top of orders, and none of those could be blamed on my sister. Besides, what would she do if she didn't work with me? I preferred having her where I knew she was safe. Bethany wandered over to the window and looked up and down Castle Street, which was already bustling with Christmas shoppers clutching armloads of bags. "Will there be lots of people there tonight?" I could hear the tension in her voice. 6 months on from the stabbing, and she was still wary about crowds of strangers. "Nothing like the numbers at the big tree. Maybe 50 or 60 people, but it's only the traders and their families. It's a lovely atmosphere and perfect for getting into the Christmas spirit. Every year on the first Saturday in December, the town's Christmas lights were switched on. An enormous crowd always gathered round the giant Christmas tree outside the shopping centre near the top of town. DJs from Bay Radio would build the revellers into an excited frenzy, culminating in a countdown. A local celebrity, typically a Z-list one who'd auditioned for a reality TV show 5 years ago, would press the button to light the tree from bottom to top. As soon as the star lit up, the rest of the lights up and down the pedestrian precinct would illuminate in waves, heralding the arrival of Christmas in Whitsborough Bay. Castle Street, a side street a little way down the pedestrianised precinct, had white lights tightly strung in a zigzag from the buildings at one side of the cobbled street to the other, creating a stunning blanket of stars between the shops and cafes. Like the rest of the town's lights, they lit up a section at a time until they reached the Christmas tree in Castle Park, a small park over the road at the end of the street. And it was there that the traders had gathered for the past decade for a private celebration, catching up over a cup of tea, coffee or hot chocolate from the chocolate pot. Shortly before I opened the shop in October 4 years ago, I'd traipsed up and down Castle Street, armed with a pocket full of business cards. I'd introduced myself to each of the traders and handed over a card, asking them to think of me for birthdays, weddings, anniversaries, or any other special occasion. Everyone had been friendly, welcoming me to the street and wishing me luck, but a few jokingly asked where their free sample was. I kicked myself for a blindingly obvious missed business opportunity. So